for people who are in the humanities. So that's number one. Second, I mean, some of the claims that I'm making are, for example, we could talk about, use of reason, instrumental reason. I mean, the kind of thing I'm thinking of is, I think it would take a certain kind of humanities scholar, I think, here I am kind of overgeneralizing, what do you do in a certain situation? And then you say, think it might be something as radical, as painful as 9/11, okay? You're supposed to do something. And I think one thing I'm suggesting is, okay, 9/11 has happened, which is horrendous. You could either say, in the name of a practical decisionism, we've got to get back, or you say, you respond with a magnificent non sequitur. You say, something like a 9/11 happened, we'll respond with universal health care. We'll respond with something that seems completely bizarre. So the whole notion of what is a response in the context of a decisionism that seems quantifiable, in response to something that has happened, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, get a step back and say, and refuse to be framed by the situation itself. To step back and say, clearly what has happened is something, horrendous, etc., but the response has to be staked out on a different kind of territory. And in that context, you produce almost like a Zen-like non sequitur, courageously to open up a different kind of inquiry, and in the process kind of hold at bay, defamiliarize that moment when you want to say, oh, I want to do something, which is something proportionate to, that kind of logic. And I think that way of thinking, it seems to me, has something to do with the humanity, this ability to kind of detach itself and do a different kind of vulnerable thinking. A couple of other things, and then I'll stop. One of my, one of the prepositions that kept coming up again and again is the notion of being between. And clearly, your very last book had the title, History of the Human and the World Between. So that is the other question, which I'm suggesting that most of us, we always are between self and other, cognition and affect, nature and culture, something and the other. But I think in the name of ideological normativity, there is a tendency to disavow the between, as if the between were a place of weakness, of some kind of pusillanimous prevarication, where we will waffle and not decide. To be between is to be liminal, to be on the way. It is, the borderlands of Gloria and Zaldua. So to be between is to be non-decisive. As against that, I think there is a way in which the between can be cultivated as a place to be, as a place to occupy rigorously, conscientiously, and accountably, and not as an act of, of not wanting to decide. And I think there's a way in which the study of literature, allows us for us to cultivate the between as a viable coordinate, rather than as a coordinate that doesn't really exist or is always en route to something else. The Bildungsroman, it's almost like saying, at 25 I became who I am, and then I became a piece of stone. It was just death after that. I'm leading a posthumous life like Keats. Hey, the Bildungsroman, I became who I wanted to be. At 25, I know who I am, and after that, it literally was rigor mortis. I mean, I never changed. I became an American. I became a male. I became a normative, whatever it was. The rest of it was death. Things happen around me. No, I won't change my mind. Already I had been formed. The template had been instilled in me in such a juridical way. Anything that happened after that, not a chance that it will make me, say, oh my God, maybe that's wrong. Actually, I'm in some sense between. But the between is something that my cogito refuses to accept as a viable epistemological situation. Here I'm sort of one of the Ranajit Guha, the great subaltern historian, gave a bunch of lectures in Columbia and published as a book as History at the Edge of World History. And there he's suggesting, and this is something I do want to talk about, and here's Guha, who is an eminent historian, eventually lamenting the fact that history is happening not in history, but somewhere else. That history has become absolutely useless for a variety of reasons. History has become, epistemic violence by representation, or there is a huge disconnect between real life happening in its own quotidian formations versus what is happening within something called historiography, which has become academic. And a term that he uses is the notion of the existential tangling with the epistemological. I think and the therefore I am, or it might be dissociation of sensibility, feeling the immediacy of a poem and, the fragrance of a rose. So think of the ways in which in different disciplines the two things come together. the existential that we live. Things are happening, we are laughing, we are falling in love. This cup of coffee tastes fantastic. I love your smile. I'll compare thee to a summer's day. But I also want to say, that moment I wanted to secure it as something valuable in itself. Now that moment when the existential tangles with the epistemological, does it become fused with, oh, here the question is that of mediation. The question is that of familiarization, defamiliarization. So in literature, does that cathexis happen in a different way than it does in other disciplines? The moment where you maintain the connection with the I, with the I am, and the I think happens after the brief pause of, ergo, but at some point you want the two to connect together. So that might also be a way to think of literature. And if you do, the question of methodology becomes important again. So someone like a Said would maintain that clearly, you have to do your work, and you have to work hard to get at these literary texts, but at the same time, methodology should not come in the way of what he would call a certain fundamental worldliness. So there my question is, as we live through life, becoming, English majors, doing PhDs, just the question of the fact that you are doing that, how has it sensitized you as a human being? How has that enabled you to approach life insightfully? How has it made you connect the moment of perception with the moment of awareness? The moment of the experience with that moment when that experience suddenly shines as knowledge, as insight. Are the two the same? And they are both the same and not the same. On the one hand, you don't want to make it seem like as if it were something numinous, as if it happened without mediation. But on the other hand, you don't want to make it seem as if it is the mediation that counts. So it is that tension between the stuff that is to be known, which already exists, but on the other hand requires a certain act of unearthing, a certain act of methodological digging. And then you wonder, where am I situated? Two final things, and I'm truly, done. One is a huge issue that all of us talk about is the death of representation. So the relationship between the real and